My name is Dr. Evelyn Carter. I'm 36 years old, and I lead the trauma response team at one of the busiest level I trauma centers in Chicago. Every shift, my team fights a war most people never see. We don't wear camouflage. We wear blood. I've stood over patients whose hearts had stopped beating. I've told mothers their children survived against impossible odds. I've also told husbands that their wives weren't coming home. I've made life and death decisions in less time than it takes most people to order coffee. Yet according to my family, I was just playing nurse. Not a doctor. Not a trauma surgeon. Not someone responsible for keeping people alive. Just or little Evelyn who likes hospitals. Funny how strangers trusted me with their lives, while my own family couldn't trust me with the truth about who I was. And that misunderstanding stayed alive for almost 12 years. Until one Saturday afternoon, when a single sentence from my hospital's ER chief destroyed every lie my family had spent years telling. But to understand why that moment mattered, you have to understand my family. I grew up in Rockford, Illinois. My father, Richard Carter, owned a successful plumbing company. My older brother, Mason, was the golden child. Everyone knew he'd inherit the business one day. Dad talked about it constantly. One day this company will have Carter Plumbing written across 3 counties. Mom would smile proudly. And Mason will run every bit of it. Whenever guests visited, they toured the warehouse, admired the trucks, congratulated Mason on jobs he hadn't even started yet. Then someone would eventually ask, "So what does Evelyn want to do?" Before I could answer, Mom usually answered for me. "Oh, she likes helping people. Helping people." Even when I was 14 and winning statewide science competitions, I was still helping people. At 16, I spent my weekends volunteering with EMT crews. While other teenagers worried about football games, I learned how to stop bleeding, how to perform CPR, how to stay calm when everyone else panicked. Those ambulance rides changed me forever. I knew exactly what I wanted. Medicine. Emergency medicine. Trauma surgery. I didn't just want to become a doctor. I wanted to become the doctor people prayed would walk through the door. The first person I told was my father. He laughed. Not because he thought it was funny, because he thought it was impossible. "Evelyn," he said, wiping grease off his hands. "Doctors spend 10 or 12 years in school. I know. You'll change your mind. I won't. You'll want a family. I can have both." He shook his head. No woman wants that kind of life. I remember staring at him, wondering how someone who taught me never to quit was asking me to quit before I'd even started. Medical school wasn't easy. Nothing worth having ever is. While my classmates went on vacations, I studied. When friends got engaged, I pulled overnight anatomy labs, birthdays, Christmas, Thanksgiving. Half the holidays blurred together inside hospitals and libraries. But every sacrifice had a purpose. Every sleepless night brought me closer to becoming the physician I dreamed of since childhood. The day I graduated from medical school, I mailed my parents a framed copy of my diploma. I imagined Dad hanging it beside Mason's business awards. I imagined Mom calling every relative she knew. For the first time, I believed they'd finally understand. 2 months later, I went home for Easter. The frame wasn't on the wall. It wasn't in the living room. It wasn't in the hallway. I eventually found it, still wrapped in protective paper, leaning against boxes in the basement storage room. Dust had already settled across the glass. I carried it upstairs. "Mum, why isn't this hanging?" She barely looked up from peeling potatoes. "Oh, sweetheart. We just haven't found the right place." I glanced toward the dining room. Mason had 3 framed business certificates displayed in perfect alignment. There was plenty of wall space. Just not for me. Residency changed me. A trauma surgery has a way of stripping away everything unnecessary. You stop caring about expensive clothes, fancy cars, weekend plans. The only thing that matters is whether your patient gets another sunrise. By my final year, I was operating independently. Senior physicians trusted my judgment. Residents asked for my advice. Nurses knew I stayed calm when chaos exploded. Eventually, I accepted an attending trauma surgeon position at St. Vincent Regional Medical Center. It was everything I'd worked toward. The first week, the ER chief shook my hand. "Welcome to the team, Dr. Carter." Those 4 words meant more to me than anyone realized. Because outside those hospital walls, very few people ever called me that. Family reunions became exercises in patience. Every visit followed the same script. "So Evelyn, still working at the hospital?" "Yes." "Doing nursing?" "No. I'm the attending trauma surgeon." "Oh." Then 5 minutes later, someone would introduce me to another guest. "This is our daughter. She helps out at the hospital." Sometimes, they upgraded me to, "She's basically a nurse." Other times, "She works with doctors." I corrected them. Every single time. Eventually, I noticed something. They weren't forgetting, they were choosing. Choosing the version of me that fit their picture of the family. Mason built houses. Dad built businesses. Mom raised the family. And Evelyn helped people. Nothing more. 3 months before everything changed, my hospital treated victims from a 23-car interstate pileup. It lasted nearly 14 hours. Helicopters landed nonstop. Operating rooms never emptied. Blood covered my shoes before sunrise. By the end, every trauma surgeon in the department looked ready to collapse. Our ER chief, Dr. Margaret Lawson, walked through the department after midnight. She stopped beside me. "Dr. Carter, you saved 4 people today." "I had help." She smiled. "The best doctors always say that." Then she walked away. I sat alone in the physician lounge afterward, too exhausted to move. My phone buzzed. A family group text. "Mom, family reunion next Saturday. Everyone's coming. Don't skip again." I stared at the message. I almost said no. I had every excuse. The hospital. Call duty. Fatigue. Instead, my niece Emma sent a voice message. "Aunt Evie, you promised you'd teach me first aid. I miss you." I smiled. Emma was 8. She didn't care about titles. She didn't care whether I was a surgeon or a nurse. She just loved me. And for her, I'd go. Even if I already knew exactly how the day would end, with someone introducing me as the one who works at the hospital. I had no idea that before sunset, my entire family would watch dozens of doctors stand aside, while the ER chief looked directly at me and said words none of them were prepared to hear. "Dr. Carter, I need you in Trauma 1. You're leading this case." The Carter family reunion was held every summer at my parents' house. Same backyard. Same old oak tree. Same homemade barbecue. Same people asking the same questions. And somehow, every year, I left feeling a little smaller than when I arrived. I pulled into the driveway just before noon. My silver SUV was still carrying a faint smell of antiseptic from yesterday's shift. I'd worked 18 hours straight before driving home. My shoulders ached. My hands were dry from washing them hundreds of times. But I'd promised Emma. That mattered. As soon as I stepped out of the car, a tiny blur raced across the lawn. "Aunt Evie." Emma launched herself into my arms. She'd grown taller since Christmas. Her curly brown hair bounced as she hugged me tightly. "I've been waiting all morning." I laughed for the first time in days. "I can tell." She grabbed my hand. "Come see my first aid kit." Only Emma would greet a trauma surgeon with medical supplies. I followed her inside. The kitchen was packed. Aunts, cousins, neighbors, people I only saw once a year. My mother noticed me first. "There she is." Everyone turned. For one hopeful second, I wondered if today would be different. Mom walked over smiling. "This is my daughter Evelyn." I waited. "She works over at St. Vincent Hospital." That was it. No mention of doctor. No mention of surgeon. Nothing, just works at the hospital. One of Dad's business partners smiled. "Oh, my wife is a nurse too." Mom smiled politely. "They're practically the same." I closed my eyes for 1 second, then opened them again. No, they're not. Every conversation around us stopped. I forced a calm smile. "I'm actually a trauma surgeon. I lead emergency surgeries." The man blinked. "Oh." Mom laughed softly. "Evelyn always has to make everything sound dramatic." People chuckled. The conversation moved on. And just like that, my truth disappeared again. Dad was standing outside near the grill, surrounded by contractors. blue-collar men he'd worked with for decades. As always, Mason stood beside him, the future owner, the success story, the son. Dad waved me over. I smiled. Hey, Dad. He slapped Mason on the back. Tell your sister about the new hospital project. Mason grinned. We got the plumbing contract. $6 million. Everyone congratulated him. Dad looked proud. You know, I built this company so he'd have something solid. Then he looked at me. And Evelyn, you still enjoying hospital life? I love it. Busy? Very? What exactly do you do again? I stared at him. For a second. I genuinely thought he was joking. Dade. I'm a trauma surgeon. He scratched his chin. Right. So you're supervising nurses. Several men nodded as if that sounded correct. I took a slow breath. No. I'm the physician. I perform emergency operations. One contractor looked surprised. Wet, you actually do surgery? Before I could answer, Dad laughed. She always loved science. The conversation shifted back to Mason. Again. Emma found me sitting alone on the porch 20 minutes later. She handed me a paper cup of lemonade. You look sad. I'm okay. She tilted her head. No. You're doing the fake smile. Kids notice everything. I've had a long week. She climbed onto the porch swing beside me. My teacher says doctors are superheroes. I smiled. Your teacher sounds smart. She looked confused. Why doesn't Grandma tell people you're a doctor? That question landed harder than any insult. Because it came from someone too young to understand pretending. I looked toward the backyard. Mom was introducing Mason to another guest. Dad was showing off photos of new construction projects. Nobody had mentioned my name in almost half an hour. I don't know, sweetheart. Emma thought quietly. I tell everybody. You do. She nodded proudly. My aunt saves people. Simple. Honest. True. Children have a way of cutting through years of nonsense. After lunch, Dad stood up holding a glass. The annual family toast. He loved these speeches. I just want to say, I'm proud of what this family has built. He pointed toward Mason. My son keeps this family business growing. Applause. He pointed toward Mom. My wife keeps us all together. More applause. He thanked my uncles, my cousins, even 2 neighbors. Then he finished, here's to family. Everyone cheered. I wasn't mentioned once. Not once. Emma looked at me. And Evie? He forgot. I forced another smile. It's okay. But it wasn't. Not really. The afternoon drifted by. Kids played tag. Adults laughed. Music echoed across the backyard. I helped Emma bandage her teddy bear. She insisted on learning how to wrap an ankle. You have to be gentle, I told her. People remember how you treat them when they're scared. She nodded seriously. I'll remember. A voice interrupted us. It was my cousin Ryan. He was carrying a football. Evelyn. We need another adult. Can you watch the kids while we play? I looked up. Watch them? Yeah. You're good with kids. Someone nearby laughed. She's basically the family nurse anyway. More laughter. I looked around. No one corrected it. Not Mom. Not Dad. Not Mason. Nobody. I stood. I'm not the babysitter. The backyard became quiet. Ryan shrugged. I didn't mean anything. I know. But words matter. They always matter. He looked uncomfortable. Sorry, it's okay? I wasn't angry with Ryan. He was simply repeating what he'd heard for years. A black SUV rolled into the driveway. Dad smiled immediately. Oh, good. The Whitmans are here. They were one of Dad's biggest clients. Everyone rushed to greet them. Mr. Whitman shook Dad's hand. Mrs. Whitman hugged Mom. Then they looked toward me. And who's this? Before I could answer, Mom smiled proudly. This is our daughter. She works with doctors. I felt something inside me crack. Not loudly. The kind of crack that forms after years of pressure. I looked directly at my mother. I don't work with doctors. I am one. Silence. Mrs. Whitman looked confused. Oh, you're a physician? Yes. I'm an attending trauma surgeon. Mrs. Whitman's eyes widened. That's incredible. Before she could ask another question, Mom interrupted. Evelyn always makes her job sound more important than it is. Nobody laughed this time. Even Dad looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Whitman simply nodded politely. I think saving lives sounds pretty important. Mom changed the subject immediately. But I noticed something. For the first time, someone outside the family had seen it. Really seen it. As the afternoon wore on, dark clouds gathered in the distance. A summer storm. The wind picked up. The kids kept playing. Adults ignored the weather. I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from the hospital. 1 voicemail. I listened. Evelyn, this is Dr. Lawson. We've had a major interstate pileup. If you're available, call us immediately. I looked toward my family, then toward the sky. Something about the wind felt wrong. Years in trauma medicine teach you to trust instincts. My phone rang again. Dr. Lawson. I answered immediately. Evelyn. We're activating mass casualty protocol. We need every trauma surgeon we have. I'll be there. I grabbed my car keys. Mom frowned. You're leaving. I have to. Dad sighed. Can't somebody else handle it? I looked him straight in the eye. No. They're asking for me. Just then, sirens echoed somewhere beyond the neighborhood. Closer than they should have been. None of us knew it yet. But within the next hour, those sirens would bring my family face with the truth they had spent years refusing to see. The moment I hung up with Dr. Lawson, I stopped being someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's forgotten success story. I became exactly who years of training had prepared me to be. A trauma surgeon. There was no room for hurt feelings anymore. Only decisions. Only patience. Only time. I'm sorry, I said, looking around the backyard. I have to go. Mom folded her arms. You've only been here 3 hours. There are people who need emergency surgery. Dad sighed. They've got dozens of doctors. They don't need every single one. I looked at him quietly. They called me because they do. For a moment, I thought he might finally understand. Instead, he shrugged. Work isn't everything, Evelyn. I smiled sadly. It is when someone won't survive without you. No one answered. I kissed Emma on the forehead. I'll see you soon. She hugged me tightly. Go save somebody. I'll try. The drive to St. Vincent Regional Medical Center usually took 25 minutes. I made it in 16. Police escorts were already guiding emergency vehicles through downtown. Ambulances screamed past every intersection. News helicopters circled overhead. Electronic highway signs flashed. MAJORACCD and EXPTDLS. My phone buzzed again. Dr. Lawson. Where are you? 3 minutes out. We've confirmed 28 victims. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. How many critical? 12. I didn't answer. 12 critical patients meant 12 families waiting for miracles. The emergency entrance looked like controlled chaos. Paramedics ran beside stretchers. Nurses pushed crash carts. Security officers cleared hallways. Helicopters landed one after another on the rooftop pad. I parked wherever I could. Didn't even lock my car. Inside, everything moved at impossible speed. The charge nurse spotted me first. Dr. Carter. Trauma 2 is yours. No introductions. No explanations. Just trust. I changed into surgical scrubs while walking. Hair tied back. Mask around my neck. Gloves ready. By the time I entered Trauma 2, the first patient had already arrived. 23-year-old male. Motorcycle collision. Multiple fractures. Severe abdominal bleeding. Blood pressure dropping. Report. The paramedic answered without hesitation. High. Speed impact. Lost pulse once. Returned after CPR. Suspected liver laceration. I nodded. Type and cross. Prepare OR3. Ultrasound. Large bore IV. Everyone moved instantly. Nobody questioned my orders. Nobody hesitated. This wasn't because I was loud. It was because they trusted me. Years of working together had built that trust. The operating room became its own universe. Outside, families cried. Phones rang. News crews gathered. Inside, only one thing mattered. Stopping the bleeding. For nearly 2 hours, my team worked without pause. Clamp, suction sutures, blood transfusions, monitor alarms, steady breathing. Finally, the bleeding stopped. His heartbeat stabilized. I stepped back. He'll make it. The anesthesiologist smiled beneath his mask. Nice work, doctor. No celebration. No applause. Another patient was already waiting. By early evening, I'd completed 3 emergency surgeries. 1 splenectomy. 1 damaged intestine. 1 ruptured liver repair. Every patient survived. I finally removed my gloves. Someone handed me a bottle of water. My hands trembled slightly. Not from fear. From exhaustion. I'd been operating almost nonstop since arriving. Dr. Lawson walked into the surgeon's lounge. "You've been asking about your family." I frowned. "My family," she nodded. "They're here." I blinked. "What?" "They came about 40 minutes ago." A strange feeling settled in my chest. "Why?" "Apparently your father collapsed." Everything inside me froze. "What happened?" "We don't know yet." Hay complained of chest pain during the reunion. They drove him here. I was already walking. The emergency waiting room looked completely different from the backyard. Gone were the smiles. The jokes. The barbecue. Now, everyone looked frightened. Mom sat holding Dad's wallet. Mason paced the floor. Emma slept against her mother's shoulder. None of them noticed me at first. They were too focused on the treatment doors. Still wearing blood-speckled surgical scrubs. I walked toward them. Mom looked up. "There you are. Dad's having chest pain." "I know." She grabbed my arm. "Can you find a doctor?" For one long second, I simply stared at her. "Find? Doctor?" After everything. After years of introductions. Years of corrections. Years of pretending. She still didn't see me. "I'll check on him." She nodded gratefully. "Thank you." As I turned toward the treatment area, I heard another family nearby crying. A little boy was asking if his father was going to die. His mother couldn't answer. This place didn't care about titles, only truth. I pushed through the double doors. Every nurse I passed nodded. "Evening, doctor." "Dr. Carter?" "Good save in trauma too." I barely noticed. To me, this was normal. But someone else had noticed. Mason. He'd followed me without saying a word. Standing just beyond the waiting room doors, he watched every interaction. Every nurse. Every resident. Every orderly. Every person addressed me exactly the same way. "Doctor." His forehead creased. Confusion. Disbelief, almost embarrassment. He caught up to me. I stopped. "What? Why is everyone calling you doctor?" I looked directly at him. "Because that's what I am." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Before he could say another word, a resident ran toward us. "Dr. Carter. We need your opinion in trauma 4. "I'll be there." I turned back to Mason. "I have patience." He stood frozen in the hallway, watching me disappear through another set of emergency doors. For the first time in his life, he wasn't looking at his little sister. He was looking at someone he didn't recognize. Someone the entire hospital respected. And somewhere deep inside, the story our family had repeated for years was beginning to crack. But the biggest moment hadn't happened yet. Because 10 minutes later, the chief of emergency medicine would walk into the waiting room, see me sitting beside my father between surgeries, and say 8 words that would leave my entire family speechless. "Dr. Carter, I need you immediately. Trauma command is waiting." For years, my family had lived in 2 different worlds. In their world, I was the quiet daughter who worked at a hospital. In mine, people handed me their loved ones and trusted me to bring them back alive. Those 2 worlds were about to collide. I entered trauma 4. A woman in her early 50s lay on the stretcher. Multiple rib fractures. Collapsed lung. Possible internal bleeding. The resident looked relieved the second he saw me. "Dr. Carter, her blood pressure keeps dropping. CT confirms a splenic rupture." Operating room. I looked at the monitor. Then at the ultrasound. "No, not yet." The resident looked confused. "But the scan." "The scan is 5 minutes old." Patients change. I placed my hand gently on the woman's abdomen. She winced. I checked her pupils. Listened to her breathing. Looked at the monitor one more time. Then I made the decision. Prep the OR. Now. No hesitation. No debate. Within seconds, everyone moved. That was trauma medicine. Sometimes you had 10 minutes. Sometimes you had 10 seconds. An hour later, the surgery was over. Successful. Again. As I stepped into the hallway, sweat soaked through the back of my scrubs. I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I couldn't even remember drinking the bottle of water someone had handed me earlier. The charge nurse smiled. 4 surgeries. 4 saves. I shook my head. 8 was the whole team. "You always say that." Before I could answer, My pager vibrated. ERKHIEFRQSTN I turned immediately. Darker. Margaret Lawson stood inside the Trauma Command Center. She was studying a wall covered with patient names. When she saw me, she smiled. There you are. How's your father? They're still running tests. She nodded. Good. Then she handed me another chart. I need your opinion. Patient in trauma 6. Possible aortic injury. I'd trust your judgment over anyone else's. Those words meant something. Not because they praised me, but because they reflected years of earned trust. You don't receive trust in emergency medicine. You earn it, one patient at a time. As we walked toward trauma 6, Dr. Lawson glanced sideways. I met your family. I smiled faintly. I'm sorry. She laughed softly. No, I'm sorry. I looked at her. They seemed genuinely surprised you're one of my attending surgeons. I didn't answer. She sighed. I've never understood families like that. Neither had I. Trauma 6 was worse than expected. A construction worker, 48 years old. Steel beam collapse. Massive internal injuries. The resident began presenting the case. Halfway through, Dr. Lawson interrupted. Dr. Carter, what would you do? Every resident in the room looked toward me. I stepped closer to the scans, studied them for less than 30 seconds, then pointed. There. The resident leaned forward. I don't see it. You will. The tear starts here. It extends behind the heart. Silence. Another attending surgeon reviewed the image. His eyebrows lifted. She's right. He looked at me. I completely missed that. Dr. Lawson smiled. I thought you might. She turned toward the room. This is why experience matters. Then she looked back at me. Led the operation. 2 hours passed. Then another. Outside A waited. My family waited. Time didn't exist. Only heartbeats, blood pressure, oxygen saturation. Every second mattered. Finally, just after 9 o'clock, the patient stabilized. As we finished closing the incision, the anesthesiologist let out a long breath. I honestly didn't think he'd make it. I removed my gloves. Neither, when I returned to the waiting room. Dad was sitting up right now. The cardiologist had ruled out a heart attack, severe dehydration, stress, high blood pressure. Nothing life-threatening. Relief washed over everyone's faces. Emma saw me first. Aunt Evie. She ran over and hugged me carefully. You smell funny. I laughed. Hospital. She wrinkled her nose. It smells like medicine. It usually does. Dad looked exhausted. He motioned for me to sit beside him. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. You've been working this whole time? Yes. While we were sitting here. Yes. He stared at the floor. I didn't realize. I waited. How much responsibility you actually have. It wasn't an apology. But it was the closest thing I'd ever heard. Before I could answer, the automatic doors opened. 3 residents hurried toward us. Behind them walked Dr. Margaret Lawson, still wearing her white coat, still carrying patient charts. She spotted me immediately. Without hesitation, she changed direction. Straight toward our chairs. Everyone in the waiting room watched. She stopped directly in front of me. Dr. Carter. I've been looking everywhere for you. I stood. What happened? The helicopter from Madison County just landed. Multi-system trauma. They're requesting you specifically. Around us. The waiting room fell completely silent. Lawson continued speaking as though nothing unusual was happening. The vascular team is ready. Orthopedics is waiting. But they won't start until you're there. Then she noticed my father. You must be Dr. Carter's family. Dad nodded slowly. Yes, Dr. Lawson smiled warmly. I've wanted to meet you. You should know. You raised one of the finest trauma surgeons I've worked with in 30 years. No one spoke. Not Mom. Not Mason. Not anyone. She kept going. Tonight alone she has led 4 emergency surgeries. Every one of those patients is alive. If Dr. Carter hadn't been here today, I would have lost people. She said it so naturally. As if it were obvious. As if everyone already knew. Only, they didn't. My mother stared at me. Her eyes filled with tears. Mason looked like someone had taken the ground out from under him. Dad couldn't even lift his head. For the first time in my life, My family wasn't hearing the truth from me. They were hearing it from the person whose opinion mattered most, the chief of emergency medicine. Dr. Lawson touched my shoulder. "We need you." I nodded immediately. Then, before leaving, I looked back at my family. No anger, no satisfaction, just quiet honesty. "I'll come back after surgery." Nobody stopped me. Nobody asked me to stay. They simply watched as doctors, nurses, and residents stepped aside, making room for the woman they had spent years calling the one who plays nurse. And for the first time, my family watched me disappear through those trauma doors, not as their overlooked daughter, but as the doctor everyone inside that hospital depended on. The trauma bay doors closed behind me. Once again, my family disappeared from my mind, not because I didn't care, because someone else's family needed me more. That is the first lesson every trauma surgeon learns. When you're inside the operating room, there is only one priority. The patient. The helicopter patient arrived unconscious. 32-year-old male. Construction foreman. Fell nearly 40 feet after a crane cable snapped. The flight nurse gave report while we rolled him toward Trauma 1. Blood pressure 70/40. Pelvic instability. Suspected liver laceration. Open femur fracture. Lost pulse once during transport. I looked around the room. Every face was waiting. Residents, nurses, anesthesiologists, respiratory therapists. No one spoke. Finally I nodded. "Let's go." The room exploded into motion. Outside, my family waited. Inside, another life hung in the balance. For nearly 3 hours, we fought for him. Blood transfusions, emergency thoracotomy, massive hemorrhage control. Every victory lasted only minutes before another complication appeared. Twice, his heart nearly stopped. Twice, we brought him back. Near midnight, the monitor finally settled into a steady rhythm. I stepped backward. The room became quiet. The anesthesiologist smiled beneath her mask. "I think we finally won." I looked at the patient. He won. We just gave him the chance. While I was operating, something unexpected happened in the waiting room. Dr. Margaret Lawson returned. She wasn't looking for me this time. She walked directly toward my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter." My father stood. "Yes, I'm Margaret Lawson. I'm Chief of Emergency Medicine." Dad immediately extended his hand. "It's nice to meet you." She smiled warmly. "I've wanted to meet Dr. Carter's parents for years." Mom looked surprised. "For years?" Dr. Lawson nodded. "Oh yes. Evelyn talks about her family often." Mom lowered her eyes. "I didn't know that." Dr. Lawson sat beside them. "I hope you don't mind if I keep you company while she's operating." Nobody objected. Silence lingered for a moment. Then Dr. Lawson asked quietly, "Has Evelyn always been this determined?" Dad laughed softly. "Since she was little? If she wanted something, nobody could stop her." Dr. Lawson smiled. "I can believe that." She folded her hands. "Do you know what she did during the COVID years?" Mom shook her head. "No. She lived in the hospital. For almost 6 months." Dad frowned. "What do you mean?" "She rented a small apartment near the hospital. But she barely used it. Most nights she slept in the physician lounge." Mom blinked. "Why?" "Because she was afraid she'd bring the virus home to you." Silence. Nobody moved. Dr. Lawson continued. "She missed birthdays, Christmas, Thanksgiving. Not because she wanted to. Because she refused to leave patients who needed her." My mother's eyes slowly filled with tears. "We never knew." Dr. Lawson nodded gently. "I know. She never told anyone. She doesn't talk about sacrifices. She just makes them." Dad stared across the waiting room. "I always thought." He stopped. "What?" Dr. Lawson asked kindly. "I thought she loved the hospital more than us." The chief looked at him for a long moment. "Nope. She loved you enough to stay away. So you wouldn't get sick." Dad lowered his head. His shoulders began to shake. Across the room, Mason sat alone. He hadn't spoken in nearly an hour. Emma climbed into the chair beside him. "Daddy," he smiled weakly. "What is it? Why does everybody at the hospital know Aunt Evie?" He looked toward the trauma doors. "I don't know." Emma frowned. "I think I do." He looked down. "Because she helps everybody." Children always found the simplest truth. A nurse walked into the waiting room carrying coffee. She recognized Dr. Lawson immediately. Doctor. Then she noticed Evelyn's family. Oh, you must be Dr. Carter's parents. Mom nodded quietly. The nurse smiled. I've worked with your daughter for almost 8 years. You should be incredibly proud. Dad swallowed hard. We are. The words sounded unfamiliar, like he'd never said them before. The nurse laughed softly. I'll tell you something. Every new resident is terrified of their first trauma case. But once Dr. Carter walks into the room, they calm down. Mom looked surprised. Really? The nurse nodded. She never raises her voice, never panics. When she's there, everyone believes the patient has a chance. She smiled. That's rare. Then she excused herself and returned to work. Another silence settled over the room. This one felt different, heavier. About 30 minutes later, an elderly janitor pushed his cleaning cart past the waiting area. He suddenly stopped. His face lit up. Oh, you're Dr. Carter's family. Dad nodded. I am. The janitor smiled warmly. She's a good woman. Mom managed a small smile. You know her too. He chuckled. Everybody knows Dr. Carter. 5 years ago, my wife collapsed right over there. He pointed toward the hallway. Cardiac arrest. I thought I'd lost her. He wiped his eyes. Your daughter stayed after her shift ended. 3 extra hours. She sat with my wife until she woke up. I've never forgotten that. Mom covered her mouth. I didn't know. The janitor nodded. She probably never mentioned it. She never tells people the good things she does. Then he quietly continued mopping the hallway. Dad leaned back in his chair, his voice barely above a whisper. I've spent years introducing Mason as the son who builds homes. He looked toward the operating rooms. And all this time, my daughter has been rebuilding lives. Nobody answered. Because nobody could nearly 4 hours after I entered surgery. The operating room doors finally opened. I stepped into the hallway. Completely exhausted. Hair damp. Scrubs wrinkled. My mask hanging loosely around my neck. Dr. Lawson met me halfway. He's stable. I nodded. Good, she smiled proudly. That makes 5 surgeries today. 5 lives. I looked toward the waiting room. My family was watching us. Every word. Every expression. Every gesture. Dr. Lawson noticed. She smiled knowingly. They've been learning about you all night. I frowned. What do you mean? She laughed softly. I simply answered their questions. Then she placed a hand on my shoulder. You know, I've led this department for 23 years. I've worked with hundreds of physicians. She looked directly into my eyes. And if my own family ever needed trauma surgery, I'd pray you were the doctor walking through those doors. Before I could respond, I noticed my father. He was crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. With the expression of a man who had spent years believing he knew his daughter. Only to realize he'd never truly seen her at all. I stood outside the operating room for nearly a minute. My body wanted rest. My mind wanted silence. Instead, I saw my family slowly walking toward me. Nobody spoke. Not at first. For years, they'd always had something to say. Tonight, they had nothing. My father stopped a few feet away. He looked older than he had that morning. Not because of the hospital visit, because regret has a way of aging people. His hands trembled as he looked at me. I don't know where to start. I folded my arms. You can start with the truth. He nodded slowly. The truth is, I failed you. The hallway became completely silent. I celebrated Mason every chance I got. I bragged about every contract, every promotion, every truck. He looked directly into my eyes. And I can't remember the last time I bragged about you. His voice cracked. I don't even know why. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, because I wanted him to finish. He took a deep breath. When people asked about Mason, he builds houses. When they asked about you, I felt. He searched for the word. Intimidated. I frowned. Intimidated, he nodded. I never understood medicine. I understood pipes. Concrete. Blueprints. But your world. I couldn't understand it. So instead of asking questions, I made your world smaller. So I wouldn't feel small. Those words hit harder than I expected. For the first time, my father wasn't making excuses. He was telling the truth. My mother stepped forward next. She looked like she'd been crying for hours. Evelyn, I'm so sorry. I waited. I wasn't embarrassed by you. I was terrified. That wasn't the answer I expected. She continued, when you were in medical school, I watched the news every night. Doctors dying. Ambulances. Emergency rooms. She closed her eyes. My mother died because she never stopped working. I kept thinking, if people believed you were just a nurse, maybe your life would somehow be. She couldn't finish. Safer. Tears rolled down her face. I know it doesn't make sense. But every time someone asked about you, I made your job sound smaller. As if smaller meant safer. I stood completely still. For years, I'd believed she was ashamed of me. Now, I realized she'd been living inside her own fear. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it explained it. I found your medical directive. Her head snapped up. The one where you wrote, "Don't burden Evelyn with medical decisions." Mom covered her mouth. You read it. I did. I finally understood. She started crying harder. I couldn't lose you. I already knew what it felt like to lose someone to medicine. I walked toward her slowly. I never wanted you to carry that fear alone. She whispered. I never wanted you to carry mine. For the first time in years, we hugged. Not because everything was fixed. Because honesty had finally entered the room. Behind us, Mason quietly stepped forward. He looked more uncomfortable than I'd ever seen him. I owe you something too. I looked at him. You always corrected Mom. You always corrected Dad. I heard it. I knew they were wrong. He looked away. But I stayed quiet. I nodded. I know. I told myself, it wasn't my fight. He laughed bitterly. But it was. It became my fight the moment I let people believe my sister wasn't who she really was. He rubbed the back of his neck. You know what hurts the most? What? I've spent my whole life wanting Dad to be proud of me. He smiled sadly. And tonight, I realized the person he should have been bragging about was standing right beside me. Before I could answer, Emma came running down the hallway. She wrapped both arms around my waist. Aunt Evie? I knelt down. Hey, sweetheart. She smiled proudly. I told Grandma something. What did you tell her? I said. My aunt doesn't play doctor. She is one. The adults around us laughed through their tears. Kids really do tell the truth better than anyone else. Just then, the automatic doors opened again. Dr. Margaret Lawson stepped into the hallway, carrying another patient file. She smiled when she saw us. I hope I'm not interrupting. Dad immediately stood. No, actually. I wanted to thank you. She looked surprised. For what? For telling us who our daughter really is. Dr. Lawson smiled gently. I didn't. I simply described the doctor I work with every day. Then she turned toward me. Dr. Carter. The patient from Trauma 1 just woke up. He wants to meet the surgeon who saved him. I hesitated. Dr. Lawson noticed. I can send another physician. I looked at my family. Then back at her. Nuck. I'll go. Dad suddenly spoke. Can we come? Dr. Lawson looked at me. It was my decision. I thought for a moment. Then nodded. Yes. The patient was awake but weak. His wife stood beside the bed holding his hand. The moment we entered, she rushed toward me. You saved my husband. She hugged me before I could respond. Our little girls still have their father because of you. I smiled softly. He did the hard part. He kept fighting. The woman shook her head. No, you did. Behind me, my family watched everything. No speeches. No awards. Just ordinary gratitude. The kind that can't be faked. The patient looked at me. Doctor, I don't remember much. But they told me you refused to give up. I smiled. You're here. That's what matters. As we left the room, Dad stopped walking. He looked back through the glass window, watching the little girls hug their father. Then he turned toward me. His eyes were full of tears. You build families too. I frowned. What? I always said Mason builds houses. He smiled sadly. You put families back together. For the first time in my life, those words were all I'd ever wanted to hear. Not because they erased the past, but because they proved. He finally saw me. People think forgiveness happens in a single moment. It doesn't. Forgiveness isn't one conversation. It isn't one apology. It isn't one hug in a hospital hallway. It's a choice, made over and over again, sometimes every day, sometimes every hour. That night, our family didn't become perfect, but for the first time in years, we became honest. Around 3 in the morning, my shift finally ended. The trauma center had grown quiet. The helicopters were gone. The operating rooms were being cleaned. The emergency department settled into its normal rhythm. I changed out of my blood-stained scrubs and into the jeans and sweater I'd left in my locker. When I stepped into the waiting room, my family was still there. Dad stood up immediately. "You finally finished?" I smiled. "For now." He shook his head in disbelief. "You've been awake almost 24 hours. Comes with the job." Mom looked at me carefully. "When was the last time you actually slept?" I laughed. "I honestly don't remember." She looked down. "I should have asked that years ago, before we left." Dr. Lawson walked over one last time. She smiled warmly. "Dr. Carter, I approved your vacation request." I looked surprised. "My vacation? You've postponed it 3 times. This time, you're taking it." I laughed. I was planning to argue. "I know." She smiled. "That's why I'm ordering you." My family laughed for the first time all night. Dr. Lawson looked at my parents. "Take care of her. She spends so much time taking care of everyone else. She forgets someone needs to take care of her." Dad answered quietly. "We will." The drive home felt different. Nobody turned on the radio. Nobody checked their phone. For once, silence didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. About halfway home, Dad suddenly pulled into a small diner. The same diner where we'd celebrated Mason's graduation years earlier. The same diner where we'd never celebrated mine. He looked at me. "We skipped something." "What?" "Your graduation dinner." I stared at him. "Dad, that was 12 years ago." He nodded. "I know. But it's the first chance I've had to do it right." The waitress recognized Dad immediately. "The usual." He smiled. "Actually, we're celebrating tonight." She looked around the table. "What's the occasion?" Dad didn't hesitate, not even for a second. He smiled proudly. "My daughter. She's a trauma surgeon." The words echoed through the restaurant, simple, natural, confident. No hesitation, no apology, no shrinking my accomplishments, just the truth. The waitress smiled. "That's incredible." Dad looked at me. "It really is." I felt tears filling my eyes, not because strangers knew what I did, because my father had finally said it himself. Over breakfast, we talked. Really talked. For hours. Mom asked about medical school. Dad asked what trauma surgery actually involved. Mason wanted to understand how emergency decisions were made. For the first time, they weren't pretending to listen. They were learning. I answered every question, not because I needed their approval anymore, but because they finally wanted to understand. A week later, Dad called. "You busy Sunday?" "I work until noon. Come by the house afterward." I almost said no. Hospital weeks were exhausting. But something in his voice sounded different, so I agreed. When I arrived, the backyard was full again. Neighbors, relatives, friends, even some of Dad's construction clients. For a second, I froze. Was this another reunion? Another afternoon of awkward introductions? Dad spotted me immediately. "There she is." Everyone turned. My stomach tightened. "Here we go again." Dad walked straight toward me, then placed his arm around my shoulders. "I want everyone to meet my daughter." He paused. Not searching for words this time. His voice carried across the entire yard. "This is Dr. Evelyn Carter. My daughter is one of the best trauma surgeons in Chicago." The backyard became completely silent. He smiled proudly. "Last weekend, while the rest of us were panicking, she spent 14 hours saving lives. And I couldn't be prouder." I looked at my mother. She was crying. But this time, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of pride. One of the neighbors smiled. "So you're really a surgeon?" Before I could answer, Mom spoke first. "Yes. Our daughter is a trauma surgeon. She's worked incredibly hard to become one. There wasn't a single hesitation in her voice. No minimizing. No changing the subject. No making my world smaller. She told the truth, exactly as it was. Later that afternoon, Emma tugged on my sleeve. "Come with me." She led me to the garage. On the wall, Dad had hung something new. My medical school diploma, my board certification, my fellowship certificate, each one professionally framed, centered perfectly, right beside Mason's business awards, not above them, not below them, beside them, equal. Dad walked into the garage behind us. I figured. They belonged with the rest of the family's accomplishments. I couldn't speak. He smiled. I was 12 years late. But I finally found the right wall. Several months passed. Life returned to normal. At least, hospital normal. Long shifts, emergency surgeries, late night pages, lives saved, lives lost. Through it all, my family changed in small ways. Mom started asking about my patients. Not their names, just how I was doing. Dad texted every Friday. "Eat something today." It made me laugh every time. Mason stopped introducing me as his sister who worked at the hospital. Now he always smiled proudly. "This is my sister. She's a trauma surgeon." Every single time. The biggest surprise came that Christmas. Emma handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a handmade Christmas ornament. It wasn't fancy, just painted wood. On the front, she'd drawn a woman wearing blue scrubs, a stethoscope, a tiny white coat. Above it she'd written, "M.Y. Cheryl." I looked at her. "You made this." She nodded proudly. "For your hospital tree." I hugged her tightly. "It's perfect," she whispered. "When I grow up, I want to help people too." I smiled. "You already do. You remind people to tell the truth." A few days later, I stopped by the hospital before sunrise. The emergency department was waking up. Night shift giving report, morning staff arriving, coffee brewing, monitors beeping. It felt like home. Dr. Lawson walked past me carrying a chart. "Morning, Dr. Carter." "Morning." She stopped. "I heard your father introduced you correctly at church." I laughed. "News travels fast." She smiled. "Good news usually does." Then she looked at me for a long moment. "You know, titles don't make great doctors. Character does. You've always had that." She walked away before I could answer. Sometimes people ask me, "What was the best moment of your career?" Was it my first successful surgery? Passing my board exams? Becoming an attending surgeon? Saving 5 lives in one day? No. None of those. The best moment was hearing my father proudly say, "This is Dr. Evelyn Carter." Not because I needed the title. I had earned it years earlier. But because, for the first time, my family saw me exactly as I had always been, not a girl playing nurse. Not someone who simply worked at a hospital, not a helper, a doctor, a surgeon, a daughter, and finally, someone they were proud to call their own. Because here's what I've learned after years in trauma medicine. People don't always see you clearly. Sometimes they see their fears. Sometimes they see their expectations. Sometimes they only see the version of you that's easiest for them to understand. But none of that changes the truth. You don't become valuable the day someone finally recognizes your worth. You were valuable all along. Sometimes, the people around you just need a little longer to catch up. Thank you for watching The Family Conspiracy. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next powerful family drama. Share this video with someone who needs this reminder your worth isn't defined by those who underestimate you. It's defined by the life you choose to build.